Admiral Deho Kang stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the screen before him. The images coming through were not easy to watch. New Terra colony was burning. Buildings that took decades to build were now just smoking ruins. He had seen war before many times, but this felt different. This felt personal. Daiho was 58 years old and had commanded fleets for 20 years. He knew how to keep his emotions in check. But right now his hands were shaking. 45,000 humans had lived on New Terra. Now 12,000 of them were dead. The rest were scattered, hiding in the forests or crowded into emergency shelters. His communication officer spoke quietly. The young woman's voice was tight with anger. She told him that survivors were reporting what happened. The Vrellan ships had come first, firing on civilian areas without warning. Then the Moltar forces arrived, their insect-like soldiers hunting down anyone who tried to escape. Children's hospitals, schools, family homes. Nothing was spared. Captain Minho Yoon walked up beside Deho. Minho was younger, only 42, but he had earned his position through skill and determination. His family had died in a Vrellan raid 15 years ago. He understood loss. Looking at the screen showing New Terra's destruction, his jaw was set tight. Minho asked permission to prepare weapons. His voice was calm, but Deho could hear the rage underneath. Deho shook his head slowly. Not yet. First, they needed to help the survivors. Then they would let the politicians try their way. But Deho knew deep in his heart that talking would not fix this. The attack on New Terra was not the first problem. For 18 months, human colonies had been suffering. Supply ships disappeared without explanation. Mining operations found their equipment sabotaged. Communication arrays stopped working at critical moments. Ambassador Sora Lee had brought these issues to the Galactic Council again and again. Each time, the other species dismissed her concerns. Sora was 51 years old and had spent 30 years working for peace. She believed in negotiation, in finding common ground and building bridges between different peoples. But lately, she was starting to wonder if some bridges could never be built. The council meetings had become frustrating exercises in futility. The worst part was High Prelate Thexos. The Vrellan leader sat in the council chambers with a smug expression on his reptilian face. When Sora presented evidence of attacks, he would wave his clawed hand dismissively. Border disputes, he called them. Normal friction between expanding civilizations. The other council members nodded along, unwilling to challenge the powerful Vrellan dominion. Now, with New Terra in ruins, Sora prepared to address the council one more time. She brought recordings from survivors. Medical reports showing children killed in their beds. Satellite imagery proving the Vrellan and Moltar forces coordinated their attack. The evidence was overwhelming. The council chamber was huge, with representatives from 47 different species arranged in a circular pattern. Sora stood in the center, feeling very small and very alone. She began her presentation, keeping her voice steady despite the grief threatening to overwhelm her. She showed them everything. The deaths, the destruction, the deliberate targeting of civilians. When she finished, there was silence. Then High Prelate Thexos rose to speak. He claimed that New Terra was built in disputed territory, that humans had been warned, that the Vrellan Dominion and Moltar clans were simply defending their borders. He actually smiled as he said these lies. The vote came quickly. 47 species voted to censure humanity for aggressive expansion. 3 abstained. 0 voted in support of Earth's position. Sora stood there, stunned. They were blaming the victims. 12,000 dead humans, and the galaxy was punishing humanity for it. As she left the chamber, Counselor Rylith approached her. The Tenthari representative was one of the few who seemed genuinely sympathetic. Rylith's aquatic features showed sadness as she whispered an apology. She said she wanted to help but lacked the political power to change anything. Sora thanked her but felt no comfort. Sympathy without action meant nothing. Back on Earth, the government held emergency meetings. The attack on New Terra and the Council's betrayal changed everything. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council 215 years ago, hoping to be part of a peaceful community. They had followed the rules. They had compromised when asked. They had shown patience when provoked. That patience was now at an end. Dr. Hyejin Park received the message while working in her laboratory. The 36-year-old scientist had spent years developing weapons that she hoped would never be used. Now she was being told to prepare them all. Every system, every prototype, Everything humanity had built in secret was about to become very public. Yejin felt sick. She had created the quantum disruption matrix as a defensive tool, a way to disable enemy ships without killing their crews. She had designed it thinking that if humanity ever needed it, they would use it mercifully. Now she wondered if mercy was still possible after what happened at New Terra. Colonel Jiho Shin was in the middle of training exercises when the recall order came through. At 34, he was the youngest person ever to command an elite strike force. His team specialized in impossible missions in hostile environments. Now they were being called home for briefings on something big. When Jiho learned what happened at New Terra, his first thought was of his own family. They were safe on Earth, but that could have been them. Any human colony could be next. The Vralans and Moltars had shown they were willing to murder civilians. If humanity did not respond with strength, the attacks would continue. The message went out from Earth to all human territories. Every ship, every station, every colony, prepare for war. It was not a message humanity wanted to send, but the galaxy had left them no choice. Admiral Daeho Kang assembled his senior officers. They gathered in the briefing room, their faces grim. Daeho stood before them and spoke clearly. For 2 centuries, humanity had been the quiet species, the peaceful traders, the willing negotiators. Other species had mistaken that patience for weakness. He told them about the doctrine of measured response. It was a human military philosophy that few outside Earth knew about. The idea was simple. When pushed beyond acceptable limits, humanity would not strike with blind rage. They would strike with cold calculation. They would strike with overwhelming force. And they would strike to ensure the lesson was never forgotten. Captain Minho Yoon listened carefully. He had been waiting for this moment for 15 years, ever since his family died. Now he would finally have a chance to show the galaxy what happened when you pushed humanity too far. He was ready. Ambassador Sora Lee made one final broadcast to the Galactic Council. Her message was brief. She stated that Earth was recalling her immediately. Humanity was invoking Article 7 of their membership charter, the right to self-defense without council oversight. From this moment forward, humanity would protect its people by any means necessary. Her final words were calm but carried weight. She said that humanity had sought peace and received war. They had offered friendship and received betrayal. They had shown restraint and received mockery. Those days were over. The galaxy would now see what humanity was truly capable of. High Prelate Thexos watched the broadcast and laughed. He told his advisors that humans were finally showing their true colors: aggressive, warlike, dangerous. He said this proved the Vralan Dominion was right to act preemptively against them. He began planning the next wave of attacks on human colonies. Thexos had no idea what was coming. None of them did. The galaxy was about to learn a terrible lesson. Humanity's patience had been a gift, not a weakness. Their restraint had been a choice, not an inability. And now that gift was being withdrawn. The breaking point had been reached. What came next would change the galaxy forever. Something strange was happening across human space, but nobody outside humanity noticed at first. In asteroid fields scattered across 50 star systems, rocks that had floated silently for years began to move. These were not ordinary asteroids. They were hiding places, built decades ago when humanity first joined the galactic community. Admiral Daeho Kang watched as reports came in from every human territory. Hidden shipyards were coming online. Weapons platforms that looked like space debris were powering up. Underground facilities on remote moons opened their doors. Humanity had been preparing for this possibility for 200 years, building and waiting, hoping these preparations would never be needed. Now they were needed. Dr. Heejin Park arrived at the main military command center, carrying data chips containing information about weapons systems the galaxy did not know existed. She stood before a room full of fleet commanders and began her briefing. Her hands were steady, but her heart was heavy. She explained the quantum disruption matrix first. It could send waves of energy that would shut down every system on an enemy ship without destroying the vessel itself. Engines would stop. Weapons would go dark. Life support would fail to minimal levels. The crew would survive, but their ship would become a floating metal coffin. Then she described the relativistic kill vehicles. These were simple projectiles no bigger than a car, but they traveled at 95% of light speed. When they hit a target, the kinetic energy released was like a nuclear explosion. Nothing could survive a direct hit. The swarm drones were next. Millions of small autonomous fighters that thought as one mind. They could adapt to any defense, learn from every engagement, and overwhelm even the most advanced enemy fleet through sheer numbers and intelligence. Finally, she revealed the stealth field technology. Human ships could become completely invisible to sensors. They could sit next to an enemy vessel and never be detected. The commanders in the room sat in stunned silence. One officer asked the obvious question, why had humanity never used these weapons before? Admiral Deho answered simply, because we hoped we would never need to. While the fleet prepared, Colonel Jiho Shin and his teams were already deep in enemy territory. They moved through Vrelon and Moltar space like ghosts, completely undetected. Their mission was not to fight but to watch and learn. Jiho led his team to a major Vrelon military base. They set up observation posts in the hills surrounding the facility and watched for 3 days straight. They recorded every ship that came and went. They mapped every building. They identified command structures and noted when guards changed shifts. The Vrolans never knew humans were watching them. Other teams did the same across dozens of systems. They infiltrated communication networks and listened to enemy transmissions. Human artificial intelligence systems, far more advanced than anything the galaxy had seen, began analyzing the data. Within weeks, humanity knew everything about enemy fleet positions, supply lines, command protocols, and strategic plans. The Vrolans and Moltars had no idea they were being studied. They continued making their plans, confident that humanity was weak and unprepared. Ambassador Sora Lee played her part in the deception. After returning from the Galactic Council in apparent defeat, she began sending desperate messages requesting new meetings. She proposed compromises. She offered concessions. She appeared to beg for council intervention to stop further attacks. High Prelate Thexos loved it. He told his advisors that humans were showing their true weakness. He granted Sora a meeting just so he could enjoy rejecting her proposals in person. He brought Warlord Krexin, the insect-like leader of the Moltar military forces, to join him in mocking humanity's diplomatic efforts. Sora sat across from them and delivered her performance perfectly. She presented peace proposals she knew they would reject. She warned them that humanity had no choice but to defend itself. She even let her voice shake a little, as if she were frightened. Thexos and Krexin dismissed her concerns. They said humanity should surrender its colonies in disputed space. They demanded reparations for the trouble of dealing with human expansion. They laughed openly at her discomfort. The meeting ended with them more confident than ever that humans posed no real threat. As Sora left, Counselor Rylith caught up with her in the hallway. The Tenthari representative looked worried. She whispered that she had heard rumors of a massive Vrelon Moltar offensive being planned. They intended to strike multiple human colonies simultaneously, hoping to force Earth into complete surrender. Sora thanked her for the warning. She did not mention that human intelligence had already intercepted those plans 3 weeks ago. She did not say that humanity was counting on that offensive. She simply looked sad and walked away, maintaining her role as the helpless diplomat. Back in human space, the trap was being set. Several colonies in disputed zones appeared to be evacuating in panic. Civilian transports were seen loading people and fleeing toward safer territory. Reconnaissance drones from Vrelon and Moltar forces observed and reported this apparent retreat. What those drones did not realize was that they were watching holographic projections. The transports were empty. The civilians were safely underground in hardened shelters. The colonies looked abandoned but were actually elaborate traps filled with sensors, automated defenses, and hidden human forces. Captain Min Ho-yoon drilled his crew endlessly on the dreadnought Indomitable Will. Every system was checked and rechecked. Every weapon was calibrated to perfection. Every crew member knew their role in the coming battle. When a junior officer complained about the intense preparation, Minho's response was sharp. He told them they were not preparing just to win. They were preparing to win so decisively that no species would ever threaten humanity again. They were preparing to survive and to make sure their enemy learned a lesson that would last for generations. Dr. Hijin Park spent her evenings in virtual reality, walking through a memorial of New Terra's victims. She studied their faces, children, parents, grandparents, people who just wanted to live peaceful lives. Every night she reminded herself why she was preparing weapons of war. A colleague found her there one night and suggested she was becoming obsessed. Yijin disagreed. She said these faces justified everything she had created. Every weapon, every system, every innovation that would be used in the coming war was in memory of these innocent people. She needed to remember that. Colonel Jiho Shin's teams had one close call during their intelligence-gathering mission. A Moltar patrol stumbled upon one of his observation posts. The guards were checking an area they normally ignored. Pure chance brought them to the exact spot where 3 human soldiers were hiding. Jiho made the hard choice. His team could not be discovered. The mission was too important. He gave the order and his soldiers moved with deadly efficiency. The Moltar guards died before they could raise an alarm. It was quick and quiet, but it weighed on Jiho. These were the first deaths in a war that had not officially started yet. He reported the incident to Admiral Deho. The Admiral listened, and then reminded Jiho that they did not start this war. The Vrylans and Moltars had killed 12,000 civilians at New Terra. What came next was justice, not murder. Jiho understood, but that did not make it easier. High Prelate Thexos received reports that human colonies appeared to be in chaos. His military advisors told him this was the perfect time to strike. The humans were scattered, afraid, and unprepared. The combined Vrylan-Moltar fleet could sweep through human space and end this problem once and for all. Thexos agreed and gave the order. The largest fleet ever assembled by the Vrylan Dominion and Moltar clans began moving toward human territory. Hundreds of warships, thousands of support vessels, an invasion force that looked unstoppable. They thought they were hunters. They did not realize they were prey. Admiral Deho Kang watched the enemy fleet movements on his tactical display. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The enemy was committing their forces to positions that humanity had chosen for them. They were walking into a trap that had been months in the making. Around him, his staff worked quietly and efficiently. There was no excitement, no eagerness for battle. Just calm professionalism. They all knew what was coming. They all knew what they were about to unleash on an unsuspecting enemy. Deho allowed himself one moment of reflection. He thought about all the years of patience, all the insults absorbed, all the provocations ignored. Humanity had shown restraint not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to choose peace. That choice had been rejected. Now the galaxy would see what happened when humanity stopped being patient. The Ghost Protocol phase was complete. Every piece was in position. Every weapon was ready. Every soldier knew their duty. The enemy fleet was exactly where humanity wanted them to be. Admiral Deho Kang took a deep breath and gave the order that would change everything. Execute Protocol Thunder. The war was about to begin. The Vrylan-Moltar fleet entered the disputed zones expecting an easy victory. Hundreds of warships moved in perfect formation, their commanders confident and relaxed. They had scouted the human colonies and seen them apparently abandoned. This would be simple. They would claim the territory, destroy whatever infrastructure remained, and send a clear message to Earth. High Prelate Thexos watched from his flagship with satisfaction. Warlord Krexen commanded the Moltar forces from a massive battle carrier. Both leaders were already planning victory celebrations. Neither noticed the small anomalies in their sensor readings, tiny fluctuations that might have been equipment errors or background radiation. Those anomalies were human stealth ships, positioned weeks ago. Waiting silently, Admiral Deho Kang watched his tactical display as the enemy fleet committed fully to their attack vectors. They were exactly where he wanted them, spread across 3 star systems. Confident in their superiority, completely unaware of the trap, he looked at his weapons officer and spoke one word: execute. The relativistic kill vehicles had been launched days earlier from beyond detection range. They had been traveling through empty space, accelerating to 95% of light speed. Now they reached their targets. The first flagship exploded without warning. One moment it was there, the next it was expanding gas and debris. Then another flagship died, and another. Across all 3 systems, the command ships of the Vrylan-Moltar fleet simply ceased to exist. The kinetic impacts were so fast that the victims never saw them coming. High Prelate Thexos felt his ship shudder. Alarms screamed. Officers shouted reports. The fleet was under attack, but from where? His sensors showed nothing. No enemy ships. No incoming missiles. Just flagship after flagship vanishing in bursts of radiation. Warlord Krexin tried to rally his forces, but his commands could not reach most of his fleet. The flagship that served as his communication hub was gone. His Moltar warriors were brave and fierce, but they could not fight an enemy they could not see. Then the second wave hit. Dr. Hyojin Park activated the quantum disruption matrix from the safety of a human command ship. The weapon sent cascading waves of quantum interference through space. These waves passed harmlessly through human vessels protected by special shielding, but enemy ships had no such protection. Across the battlefield, Vraylan and Moltar warships went dark. Engines stopped. Weapons powered down. Life support dropped to minimal levels. Lights flickered and died. Communications fell silent. Thousands of enemy vessels became floating coffins, their crews alive but helpless. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. The enemy had gone from confident attackers to helpless victims in seconds. They had no idea what was happening. Some crews panicked. Others sat in shocked silence. A few tried to manually restart their systems, but nothing worked. Captain Minho Yoon commanded the indomitable will through the field of disabled ships. His dreadnought moved like a predator among prey. Around him, dozens of human warships emerged from stealth, finally revealing themselves. The enemy could see them now but could do nothing. His weapons officer asked permission to fire on the helpless targets. Minho refused firmly. They were not murderers. Their goal was to teach, not to slaughter. Let the enemy live to remember this day and understand the price of their aggression. The third wave arrived next. Millions of swarm drones launched from hidden carriers throughout the battlefield. These small autonomous fighters were unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Each one was smart, but together they formed a single distributed intelligence that could adapt and learn in real time. The drones descended on the disabled enemy fleet with surgical precision. They did not destroy ships. Instead, they targeted specific systems. Weapons arrays were carefully dismantled. Engine components were removed. Sensor equipment was disabled. The drones worked with terrifying efficiency, stripping away any capability for the enemy to fight back. Some ships tried to surrender, broadcasting white flag signals and pleas for mercy. The drones ignored these transmissions. They had their orders: disable completely but do not destroy. The objective was total neutralization, not annihilation. On his damaged flagship, High Prelate Thexos watched in horror as his entire fleet was systematically dismantled. His proud warships were being reduced to helpless hulks. His warriors were trapped inside, unable to fight, unable to flee, forced to simply endure the humiliation. Warlord Krexin felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. True, deep fear. His species valued strength above all else. He had built his reputation on ferocity and power. Now he was powerless, watching an enemy demonstrate capabilities far beyond anything he had imagined. While the space battle unfolded, Colonel Jiho Shin and his ground forces struck at enemy installations throughout Vraylan and Moltar territories. They moved with the precision of a surgical team. Command centers were captured. Communication hubs were destroyed. Supply depots were seized or demolished. Jiho led his team into a major Vraylan military headquarters. They had studied this building for weeks and knew every corridor, every door, every security measure. They bypassed defenses that the Vraylans thought were impenetrable. Guards found themselves disarmed and restrained before they understood they were under attack. The base commander was captured in his office. He stared at Jiho in disbelief. How had humans gotten past all his security? How had they even known where to find him? Jiho did not answer these questions. He simply secured the prisoner and moved on to the next objective. Across dozens of worlds, similar operations played out simultaneously. Human special forces struck everywhere at once. The enemy military infrastructure collapsed within hours. Commanders found themselves prisoners. Soldiers discovered their orders could not be transmitted. Supply lines were cut. The war machine that had seemed so powerful was revealed to be fragile and poorly prepared. Dr. Hyojin Park monitored the quantum disruption matrix effects carefully. She noticed that some settings were causing more harm to enemy life support than intended. Immediately, she adjusted the parameters. Yes, they were enemies. Yes, they had murdered civilians at New Terra. But humanity would not stoop to unnecessary cruelty. Her assistant questioned this mercy. Why be so careful with people who had shown humans no mercy? Hyojin's response was firm. Because how we fight defines who we are. We are not them. We will never be them. As the immediate combat operations concluded, Admiral Daeho Kang prepared to send a message to the galaxy. He stood before a camera, his expression calm but his eyes hard. Behind him, tactical displays showed the complete neutralization of the enemy fleet. His message was broadcast on all frequencies, reaching every inhabited system in the galaxy. He spoke clearly and without emotion. He reminded the galaxy that humanity had sought peace and received war, that humans had offered friendship and received betrayal, that they had shown restraint and received mockery. He stated that what the galaxy was witnessing was not the full extent of human military power. This was mercy. Humanity could have destroyed the entire enemy fleet. Instead, they had disabled it. They could have killed every enemy soldier. Instead, they had captured them. Daeho gave them 6 hours to surrender. If they refused, humanity would demonstrate what they were truly capable of. The message was not a threat. It was a promise. Throughout the galaxy, people watched in stunned silence. The species that everyone had dismissed as weak had just demonstrated overwhelming superiority. The fleet that was supposed to conquer human space was now floating helplessly. The military installations that were supposed to be impregnable were in human hands. Counselor Rylith watched from her home world, her aquatic features showing deep concern. She had tried to warn them. She had tried to tell the council that humanity was more dangerous than they appeared. Nobody had listened. Now everyone was paying the price for that arrogance. Captain Minho Yoon stood on the bridge of the Indomitable Will and looked at the disabled enemy ships drifting around him. Part of him wanted revenge for his family. Part of him wanted to destroy every ship out there. But he understood now what Admiral Daeho had meant. Killing them would be easy. Making them live with the shame of what happened would be much harder. They would go home and tell their people how human mercy had saved them. They would remember that humanity chose not to destroy them when destruction would have been simple. That memory would be a wound that never healed. Colonel Jiho Shin stood guard over captured Vraylan officers. One of them asked him why humans were treating them with such professional courtesy. They had expected execution or torture. Instead, they were being given food, medical care, and respectful treatment. Jiho explained that they were prisoners of war, not victims of revenge. Humanity did not sink to their level. They would be held accountable for their crimes, but they would be treated according to the laws of war. That was the difference between humans and those who had attacked New Terra. The 6 hours passed slowly. 3 hours in, the first surrender messages started arriving. Minor species that had supported the coalition immediately backed away. 4 hours in, the Moltar clans officially requested terms of peace. 5 hours in, the Vraylan Dominion sent word that High Prelate Thexos had been removed from power and his successor wished to negotiate. The Vraylan-Moltar coalition fell apart within hours of the human offensive. What had seemed like an unstoppable alliance crumbled like paper in fire. Warlord Krexin tried to rally his remaining forces. But his commands meant nothing when his ships could not move and his soldiers could not fight. High Prelate Thexos went into hiding on a remote Vraylan colony world. He sent desperate messages to his supporters trying to organize continued resistance. But nobody was listening anymore. His own people blamed him for leading them into disaster. Within a week, Vraylan security forces found him and placed him under arrest. The minor species that had supported the coalition immediately started sending apologies to Earth. They claimed they had been misled by Vraylan propaganda. They said they never truly wanted conflict with humanity. They begged for forgiveness and promised eternal friendship. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, suddenly very eager to discuss peace. The same representatives who had voted to censure humanity now competed to see who could praise humans most eloquently. It would have been funny if it were not so pathetic. But Admiral Daeho Kang was not finished teaching the galaxy its lesson. He selected 3 uninhabited star systems near Vraylan space. These systems had no planets capable of supporting life, just gas giants and asteroids. They were worthless except for one thing. They were visible from multiple Vraylan worlds. Human ships deployed stellar compression weapons. These devices manipulated gravity and quantum forces in ways that most species thought impossible. The stars in those 3 systems began to collapse. It happened slowly enough that anyone watching could see every stage of the process. The stars shrunk, grew denser, released massive bursts of radiation. The light shows were spectacular and terrifying. Within days, 3 stars that had burned for billions of years simply ceased to exist, replaced by dark remnants that served as monuments to human power. The message was unmistakable. Humanity possessed the power to destroy entire solar systems. They could end civilizations with the press of a button, but they chose not to. That choice was a gift, not a weakness. Several Vrlan military governors who had refused to surrender immediately changed their minds. The demonstrations of stellar compression convinced them that continued resistance was suicide. They broadcasted their unconditional surrender and begged for mercy. Ambassador Sora Lee returned to the Galactic Council. But she did not come to negotiate. She came to dictate terms. The shift in her demeanor was remarkable. Gone was the patient diplomat pleading for understanding. In her place stood a representative of the galaxy's most powerful military force. She spoke clearly and firmly. The Vrlan Dominion and Moltar clans would pay massive reparations to New Terra survivors and all affected human colonies. The amounts were not negotiable. Every credit would go toward rebuilding lives that had been destroyed. Both species would demilitarize their border regions completely. No warships, no weapons platforms, no hidden military installations. Human monitoring stations would be established throughout their territories to ensure compliance. Inspections would be unannounced and absolute. Most importantly, both the Vrlan Dominion and Moltar clans would officially and publicly acknowledge their aggression. They would admit to murdering civilians. They would confess to attempting conquest of human space. And they would thank humanity for showing restraint in response. High Prelate Thexos was brought before the council in chains. His successor, a younger Vrlan named Hexar, forced him to make a public apology. Thexos had to stand there, broadcast across the entire galaxy and admit his crimes. He had to thank humanity for not exterminating his species. The humiliation was complete. Thexos, who had laughed at human weakness, now depended on human mercy for his very life. The irony was not lost on anyone watching, but humanity's approach to justice went beyond simple punishment. Rather than execute captured enemy commanders, Earth insisted on proper trials following galactic law. Warlord Crexon was charged with war crimes for his role in the New Terra massacre. The trial was broadcast across all council worlds. Human prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence. Video footage of Moltar soldiers targeting civilians, communications intercepts showing premeditated attacks on hospitals and schools, testimony from survivors who watched their families die. But humanity also provided Crexon with competent legal defense. They gave him every right accorded to prisoners under galactic law. They followed proper procedures even though the evidence against him was undeniable. The trial was fair, thorough, and professional. A panel of judges from neutral species heard the case. They deliberated carefully. In the end, they found Warlord Crexon guilty on all charges. The sentence was life imprisonment in a human facility. Crexon expected execution or torture. Instead, he was taken to a prison where he would be housed according to human standards for prisoner rights. He would have food, shelter, medical care, and even limited recreation. He would be treated humanely despite his crimes. The message to the galaxy was clear. Humanity enforced justice, not vengeance. They would hold criminals accountable, but they would not become monsters in the process. As the formal warfare ended, humanity began something that confused many observers. Human engineering ships arrived at damaged enemy colonies. Medical vessels provided aid to injured enemy combatants. Supply convoys brought food and medicine to areas where Vrlan and Moltar civilians were suffering from war shortages. Dr. Heejin Park coordinated humanitarian aid efforts. She directed teams of human doctors and engineers to help restore infrastructure that the war had damaged. When someone asked why she was helping people who had supported attacks on humanity, her answer was simple. Her weapons had disabled their ships. Her knowledge could now heal their wounded. Both capabilities came from the same source, human ingenuity. She would not use only the destructive half of what humanity could offer. Captain Min Ho Yoon struggled with this compassion toward former enemies. He commanded ships that helped tow disabled Vrlan vessels back to their home ports. He watched as human engineers worked to repair systems that days before they had been fighting to destroy. During a private conversation with Admiral Daiho, Min Ho admitted his internal conflict. He wanted them to suffer for what they did to his family, He wanted them to feel pain equal to what they had inflicted. Deho listened and then explained. They were suffering. They were suffering the shame of knowing they attacked peaceful people and received mercy in return. That was a wound that would never heal. Their children would grow up knowing their leaders had been wrong, that their military had been defeated, and that only human compassion saved them from destruction. That legacy would haunt them far longer than any physical punishment could. Colonel Jiho Shin supervised the prisoner treatment facilities. Human guards were trained to be professional and respectful. Captured soldiers received proper food, medical care, and living conditions that met galactic standards for prisoners of war. One Vraylan prisoner asked Jiho directly, "Why did humans treat them so well? They had killed human children. They had bombed hospitals. They deserved hatred, not kindness." Jiho's answer was firm. How humanity treated its worst enemies showed who humans truly were. They could have become torturers and murderers. Instead, they chose to remain civilized. That choice separated them from those who attacked New Terra. Ambassador Sora Lee negotiated the new galactic order. She refused multiple offers to place humanity in leadership positions on the council. Instead, she insisted on reforms that gave all species equal voice. Smaller civilizations that had been ignored for centuries suddenly found their concerns taken seriously. When council members questioned why humanity was turning down power, Sora's response was clear. They had not fought for dominance. They fought for respect. There was a crucial difference. Counselor Rylith approached Sora after one particularly contentious negotiation session. She admitted she did not understand humans. They could rule the galaxy if they wanted. They had the military power. They had the moral authority after being proven right. Why were they helping those who had tried to destroy them? Sora smiled sadly. She explained that power without compassion was tyranny. Humans were teachers, not conquerors. They wanted to build a galaxy where conflicts were resolved through dialogue, not warfare. The only way to achieve that was to demonstrate both their strength and their willingness to use that strength mercifully. The galaxy watched and learned. Every species saw humanity defeat a powerful coalition, then help that coalition recover. They saw humans demand justice but temper it with mercy. They saw the most powerful military force in known space choose partnership over domination. The lesson was clear. Humanity had struck without mercy when provoked beyond tolerance. But even in victory, they remembered who they were. They were not conquerors. They were protectors. They were builders. They were, above all else, civilized. That civilization, proven in the crucible of war, would reshape the galaxy in ways no one could yet imagine. 5 years passed. The galaxy had transformed in ways that seemed impossible before the war. New Terra stood rebuilt, better than before. The colony was now both a memorial to those who died and a thriving community of 50,000 people. Gardens grew where ruins once lay. Children played in parks built on ground that had been soaked with blood. The memorial at the colony's center was simple but powerful. 12,000 names carved in stone. Above them, words that would never be forgotten. They pushed too far. We struck without mercy, but we stopped when we could have continued. Remember both parts of this truth. Admiral Deho Kang, now 63 years old, visited the memorial often. He would stand there for hours reading the names, remembering the faces he had seen in the aftermath. Those deaths had changed everything. They had forced humanity to show the galaxy who they really were. The Vraylan Dominion and Moltar clans looked very different now. Stripped of their aggressive military capabilities, both species had redirected their energy toward trade and cultural development. Vraylan merchants could be found on human worlds conducting business peacefully. Moltar artisans created beautiful works that sold across the galaxy. Young Vraylans and Moltars grew up learning about the war in their schools. They studied what their leaders had done and why it was wrong. They learned about the New Terra massacre and humanity's measured response. Most importantly, they learned that aggression brought only shame and defeat. The Galactic Council operated under new rules that Ambassador Sora Lee had fought hard to implement. No single species or coalition could dominate anymore. Smaller civilizations had real voices in decisions. Disputes were resolved through mediation before they could escalate. The system was not perfect, but it was much better. Dr. Hedgen Park, now 41, led the New Terra initiative. This program shared human technology with species committed to peaceful development. Young aliens studied at human universities. learning not just science but also the philosophy of ethical power use. Hyejin taught a class every semester on weapons development and moral responsibility. Her students came from dozens of different species. She would show them the quantum disruption matrix and explain how it worked. Then she would show them footage of New Terra and explain why it existed. Her message was always the same. Technology is a tool. How you use it defines you. Choose wisely because the galaxy will remember your choices. Hexar, the new Viralan leader who replaced High Prelate Thexos, visited Earth for the first time. He came not as a conqueror but as a student. He met with Ambassador Sora Lee, now Secretary General of the Reformed Galactic Council, and formally apologized for his species' crimes. But more than that, he asked for guidance. The Viralan people were trying to change their culture, moving away from militarism and toward cooperation. It was difficult. Many older Viralans resented the transformation. Hexar wanted to know how humanity balanced strength with compassion. Sora spent 3 days with him, sharing human history and philosophy. She told him about Earth's own violent past, how humans had once fought endless wars against each other. She explained that compassion was not weakness but the hardest form of strength. When Hexar returned home, he carried with him not just knowledge but hope. Change was possible. His people could become better. Humanity had proven it by being better even in the midst of war. Warlord Krexen sat in his human prison cell, which was more comfortable than many Moltar homes. He had spent 5 years thinking about everything that happened. He had time to read, to study, to understand the species he had tried to conquer. Colonel Jiho Shin, now a general, visited him regularly. What started as routine prisoner checks evolved into something unexpected. Correspondence and eventually friendship. They discussed strategy, culture, philosophy. Krexen began to understand humans in a way he never had before. In one letter that was later published, Krexen wrote something profound. He said that humans had defeated him not when they disabled his fleet, but when they chose to imprison rather than execute him. That mercy haunted him more than any punishment could. It forced him to acknowledge that humans were better than he had been. Captain Minho Yoon, promoted to admiral, now commanded the Third Armada. He established a program that brought children from former enemy worlds to tour human ships and learn about peace. Some of his crew questioned this decision. Why teach the children of those who killed humans? Minho's answer reflected how much he had changed. He said that carrying hatred was exhausting. Building something better was rewarding. His family would not want him to spend his life consumed by revenge. They would want him to help create a galaxy where no other family suffered as his had. The human military maintained its strength. Fleets patrolled border regions. Weapon systems remained operational. The galaxy knew that humanity could still strike with devastating force if necessary. But that knowledge now inspired respect rather than contempt. A new threat emerged in the 5th year after the war. The Crixian Empire appeared from unexplored space with aggressive expansion plans. They were powerful, confident, and dismissive of warnings. They studied records of the Verlan-Moltar War and decided it was propaganda. Surely no species was that powerful. They began probing human borders, testing defenses, preparing for what they assumed would be easy conquests. Their commanders laughed at human warnings. They had seen nothing that impressed them. Admiral Deho Kang sent a single message to the Crixian leadership. It was brief and clear. Humanity preferred peace. Humanity practiced patience. Humanity hoped the Crixians were wiser than those who came before. But the Crixians should know that human mercy had limits and human memory was long. Choose carefully. The Crixian High Command received the message and laughed. Then one of their intelligence officers presented a detailed analysis of the war against the Viralan-Moltar coalition. Real data, verified footage, interviews with survivors, mathematical models of human weapons capabilities. The laughter died. Within a week, the Crixian Empire requested diplomatic relations with humanity. They withdrew all military assets from human borders. They signed non-aggression treaties. They even requested permission to send students to the New Terra Initiative. The lesson held. Humanity had proven that patience was a choice, not a weakness. That proof had reshaped the galaxy's understanding of power. On the 10th anniversary of the New Terra attack, representatives from every galactic species gathered at the memorial. Even Viralans and Moltars attended, standing quietly among the humans whose families they had destroyed. Admiral Min Ho Yoon, chosen to give the main speech, stood before the gathered crowds. He spoke about remembering without nursing grudges, about honoring the fallen by building a better future, about how the memorial stood not just for New Terra's victims, but for the path humanity chose afterward. He said that humanity could have sought vengeance. They could have dominated the galaxy. They could have made their enemies suffer, as they had made humans suffer, but they chose justice tempered with mercy. They chose partnership over domination. That choice defined them more than any battle ever could. As the ceremony ended, a young Vralin student approached a human teacher. The student had been learning about the war in school and wanted to understand something that confused her. Why had humans not destroyed the Vralins when they had the chance? The teacher, a retired combat officer who had fought in the war, thought carefully before answering. She explained that destruction was easy. Any species with sufficient technology could annihilate enemies. The hard part was winning without becoming what you fought against. If humanity had erased the Vralins from existence, they would have been murderers, not defenders. They would have proven Thexos right about humans being a threat. Instead, they showed that accusations of human aggression were lies. The student asked if it was pride that made humans spare them. The teacher shook her head. It was not pride. It was a desire to prove something through actions rather than words. Vralins had called humans weak for seeking peace. Humans showed that peace was a choice made by the strong, not the weak. The student was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she asked if humans would ever use their terrible weapons again. The teacher looked out at the memorial, at the names carved in stone, at the peaceful colony that had risen from ashes. She hoped humanity would never have to use those weapons again, but if someone pushed too far, if they mistook patience for weakness and mercy for cowardice, then yes, humans would strike without mercy once more, but only after every other option had been exhausted. That was the human way. Hope for the best. Prepare for the worst. Never forget the lessons learned in blood and fire. Above them, a human military vessel passed overhead. Its presence was both reassuring and sobering. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity sought peace but could wage war. They preferred dialogue but possessed overwhelming force. They showed mercy but demanded justice. The balance was delicate but stable. Other species no longer saw humans as weak newcomers to be exploited. They saw partners to be respected, allies to be valued, and, if necessary, a force to be feared. Admiral Daeho Kang retired finally at age 65. He wrote his memoirs, titled simply, The Weight of Restraint. In it, he reflected on the war and its aftermath.